Welcome to lesson 25. As I promised you in the last video, we're going to talk about tenons. Now, tenons can be one of the best holding methods you have on the lathe for large projects if they're well made. They also can be one of the most dangerous ways of holding if you don't make it properly. Now, there's four different kinds of tenons we're going to talk about. There's the inside where we open into a recess. There's the outside tenon where we grab a tenon. And then there are two different kinds of chucks on the market, ones that require a straight tenon and one that requires a dovetail. We're going to cover all four of those. And at the end, I want to show you some of the things on the back table, different chucks, different kinds of jaws that require similar and yet somewhat unique tenons. So let's get started. I've got a piece of wood on the lathe, and I don't know what this is going to be, but it could be a project that I need to bore into the end of or hollow out, and I'm going to create something, and this has to be put onto a chuck so I can have access to this end. So I'm going to show you how to make a tenon. I'm going to do it with a straight jaw, and then I'm going to modify it into what would be required for a dovetail. The steps are identical. Okay, so here's my piece of wood. It's between centers. If I turn the lathe on, I can see that this end is a little bit out of round. It's okay, I just need to note that. One of the things we need to know about making tenons on chucks, these jaws can be opened to a wide variety of sizes. But when the jaws were made, this was a circle of metal and then cut into quarters. So the best perfect fit is when this is nearest being closed. And yet sometimes for better holding, we think we ought to open these jaws up really wide and bite into a larger tenon. But if you can visualize a circle in here, at this diameter, there are 8 corners that are going to touch the wood, not the whole of the jaws. So we'd like to make tenons that are appropriate. And if we need a large tenon because it's a large project, then maybe we need to change jaws on the chucks from a smaller jaw to one that's larger. And I'll show you those later. So I'm going to set this about here and say that's probably for my project where I want the tenon to be. The jaws are almost circular in terms of their configuration. The body of the jaw is inside the chuck, so I'm not going to bang my fingers on it very much, or hopefully I don't. So now I need to transfer that to here. And the difficulty is I've got to know what these dimensions are. I'm not going to measure it in terms of being this 1 7/8 inches. I don't need to do that. I have a pair of inexpensive metal calipers, a good pair for everybody to have. But the first thing I want to know is how big around should the tenon be. So I'm going to take my calipers and measure across the smallest portion of the jaws. And I've got that measurement, and I can easily now transfer that to the end of the wood. And I'm going to transfer that all the way around by just drawing a circle. So now I know how big around the tenon needs to be. Next thing I need to know is how deep does this need to be. Now, depth is an interesting thing. I do not want to go to the bottom. That's too long, and remember the surface, it's irregular. If that bottomed out, the piece will not be held properly. The registration surface is the top of the jaw. So it needs to set here, fit inside here. So I'm going to measure the depth of this jaw with my calipers. That's how deep it is. And I know that's too deep. So what I'm going to do is put a mark on here about its diameter. And I'm going to come inside of that a little bit. And with my pencil, transfer that around. Now, my tenon, I need to turn away. All of that. So my job is to take this wood down to that mark and down to this mark. And that's going to give me a tenon of the right dimension. It won't be perfect yet, but that's step one. And that can easily be done with a parting tool. In fact, I'm going to do almost all the work with either a parting tool or a skew chisel. So let's remove the bulk of the non-tenon material. almost to that pencil mark. Hopefully somewhat near it. Okay, so I've got the bulk out. Next thing I want to do is be sure that this wall, because I'm doing a straight tenon first, this wall is perfectly parallel with the axis of the lathe, in other words, straight. And then the next thing I'm going to do is make sure the corner down in here is square. So let me carefully, by eye, it's pretty straight. And now I want to get this corner down in here to be perfectly square. If the corner looks like this, in other words, it has a little bit of error in their hand, the jaws clamp down, they're going to clamp on this. And I'm not going to take advantage of these surfaces. This has to be dead square in here for these jaws to bite in properly. So that's an easy task for the skew chisel. I'm simply going in and making sure the bottom of that corner is clean. I can turn my skew chisel around and scrape across here if I want to make sure that is square. And one of the easiest ways to determine if it's correct, get yourself a 6-inch scale. Nice square corners on the end. I can put it down into here and sight down and tell if that corner is square. From the front camera it looks like this. From the back it looks like that. But I'm looking at that corner. So now there is a tenon that will fit that chuck perfectly. It's going to bite into these surfaces. This edge here is going to register on the top of this jaw. That's the basics of making a good tenon for a straight jaw. For a dovetail, where the jaw is shaped in a dovetail manner, I'm going to do these same steps, but I'm going to add one additional step. I need to dovetail this so that it matches the shape of the jaws. And I'm going to back to the skew chisel again, and that scraping cut straight in, and there's my dovetail. Oops, I wasn't careful. But by turning that tool so that it matches the dovetail angle, I've done the dovetail. Same steps. Doing the dovetail for certain brands of chucks requires only that one additional step, which takes a second. I've gone in with the point of the skew chisel. I've cocked the angle this way until it matches the shape of the dovetail for my chuck. That's step one. That's an external tenon, dovetail or straight. Now, I don't know if there's advantage of one over the other. Different manufacturers will say that they have advantages in being one or the other type, but in our classroom we use all of one particular style only so that everything is consistent. It doesn't matter for any other reason than I don't have to instruct students in two different ways of doing tenons, as I just now did for you. So let's take this off and take a look at the other kind of, actually it's not a tenon, it's a rebate, and we're going to open into location. So let me reset here real quick. I'm going to take this piece off, file it there on the floor, remove my spur drive, and I'm going to put a faceplate on. And the purpose of this is probably is going to be something like a platter. So I've mounted to a glue block, which is pre-threaded. And now this is going to be the back of my platter. And I'm going to open into a rebate that this will fit into. And then after the back of the platter is finished, we reverse this onto the lathe and do the face. So I need to create something that this sets inside of. So it's a similar process. Here now, I'm going to measure the outside of the jaws at its widest portion. And this is the dimension I need to transfer to the wood. That's the easiest way to do it. And if you noticed, I touched one of the wings to the wood and not the other one. If I touched both of them, this would tear it right out of my fingers. So I've touched one, looked to see where the other one alignment would be, and I now have a mark, which now I'll pencil in so that you can see it better. Now, since it's the platter and it has a limited thickness, I want to cut one in that this will bite into, but I only want it to go a very specific depth. In this case, I think I'm going to be happy with something about 1/8 of an inch, 8 to 3/16. So let me set my calipers to 1/8 of an inch. That's how deep I need it to be. And if it's a good tenon, good rebate, it's going to hold this project really well, because these jaws will bite into the sides of it into a nice straight, and this will sit nicely on the bottom and will have good support. And for the first cuts, I'm going to have the tailstock in place when I'm working on the back side anyway. So let's do that. Let's get the tailstock further out of the way. I don't know how deep that is yet, but we'll find out in a second. It's almost 1/8. Still not quite as much. I'm being very cautious, it looks like. And there's my 1/8 inch depth. So that is the depth I need. I'm going to remove the rest of this mass in the center now because I don't need it. I can still use my parting tool. Now I'm going to plane the bottom of this across. I'm keeping the handle parallel with the bed of the lathe. I can take this out if I want. It doesn't matter because the jaws will not interfere with that area. And now I need to get that corner nice and square to be sure that it's as good as I can make it. Back to my skew chisel. Now when I finish the platter, this whole area here will get turned away into a small dish so that the platter will set on its foot properly. 1/8 of an inch removal here would be just fine. So now when I'm getting ready to mount this chuck, I can set these jaws into here, find my chuck key, and expand them into that area. That's a solid hold. I'm not going to put it on now because I have to work the back of this, but when we reverse this, this is how I'm going to hold it. If this was a dovetail, one more step, back to my skew chisel, come in here and undercut that by the angle of your dovetail. Internal, external. Making it properly is very, very important. Making sure that the jaws of your chuck and the matching tenon or rebate are appropriate for the project that you're working. This is a small platter. It's a well-balanced piece of dry maple. This is going to be sufficient to hold it when I work on the other side. Most of this mass will be removed in the back, so it won't be too much of a problem. But there's a lot of other options, and I'm going to show you some of the other kinds of chucks, some of the other kind of jaws, and other ways that we can have this combination work for you. So I'm going to step back to the back table and kind of go through some of the options we have here in the classroom. See you in a minute. Back at the back table, and I have some examples of various different chucks and jaws for them. Remember I said that you need to fit the tenon or rebate to the project. And in order to do that, you may have to change jaws on your chucks. For instance, this is the one-way stronghold chuck. And if you bought it, this is the set of jaws that come with it. And I've got to close down to the size that would make a really good contact area for the tenon. And if your project needs a tenon about 2.25 inches, this is fine. What if you're doing a big bowl or a big platter? You may want to change out to what we call number 3 jaws, but a larger set of jaws. They're not that expensive, and changing jaws in order to be safe for your project takes just about a minute. It's not a big deal. Here's the same chuck with an even larger set of jaws, but the reason I have this here is to show you, look at the dirty jaws. That's terrible. But what happens when they get full of stuff like this is that these fingers in here will not bite into the wood as they should. So I'm taking a toothbrush, cleaning those. So the other thing about tenons is the jaws need to be clean so that they will bite in appropriately inside. And if you can barely see it here, there's a articulated groove right here for like doing the platters like I just showed you earlier. Material gets stuck in there, a set of dental picks will fix that. So behind these chucks are some optional jaws. And in each case, here's the standard jaw again. I wanted to have it off so that you could see it. It's articulated inside so that it bites into the wood. And that's why these areas have to be clean. And for doing platters where I took a very light cut, there is very shallow articulated area on the outside of that jaw. Even the one-way chucks have a set of dovetail jaws. So here's the dovetail replacement for that. Sometimes I'm doing a very long project. It might be a vase or a hollow vessel. Not only do I want to get a good grip, I want to have a tenon that's long enough. So I might use a deeper jaw like these. This allows me to do a tenon that's well over 1 inch long, giving me much more surface to bite into. An exception to that is what we call number 1 jaws. This is available for most brands of chucks. It's designed to come down and grab around a dowel, down to maybe even 1/8 of an inch or so, or into a hole that's been drilled to the right diameter so it slides in like this. So these options give you a chance to hold your project as safely as possible and be sure that you have the right jaws and the chuck for the right project. Let me show you another brand. This is the one-way brand. Here is the brand from Technitool, the Nova chucks. Same idea. These are very similar. This is the larger chuck with a deep jaw. It has the dovetail fitting. It also has the articulated portion down deeper inside. A larger set of jaws. This is what came on that chuck, and we changed it out for a larger set. Let me give you another option. This is a faceplate that's designed to bolt to the back of your project, and it has the dovetail in it. It fastens to your 4-jaw chuck like that. The jaw expands into that rebate. The rebate and the jaws are designed to work perfectly as a team. These faceplates allow you to take the project off the chuck, work on it, put it back on. They come in a number of different sizes to fit these jaws, or even these smaller jaws. Various different options. But consider the possibility of using a faceplate type of attachment where I do not have to remake the tenon because it's already made for me in the plate. So I hope this has helped you understand a little bit more about chucks and tenons and the mating between the two ideas, the two types of products. Make sure you make good tenons, make some good projects. We'll see you next time.